And I believe we're live. Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good day, wherever you are in the world and whatever time of day it is. A very warm welcome to another For the Love of Comics Sunday live stream. I'm glad to see that there are people already in the chat. I've got a number of screens open, more than usual number of screens open today, and that's because we're going to be dealing with potentially a mess on our hands. Chaos is quite possible in today's live stream, just given the number of books and volumes and comics we have out here. We will today be continuing our celebration of Love and Rockets, the seminal long running series that I made a video on a couple of weeks ago. And when this live stream is over, I'll link it somewhere around here, but you can find it on my channel, which was a more introductory overview to this series and what, in my opinion, makes it so great. And we're going to go a little further today, although exactly how far remains to be seen, which is one of the reasons why this is a live stream. But before I go completely battling into the topic of today's conversation, let me quickly check on the chat. Sleepy Reader, good to see you here. Hello. Ashwita is also in the chat. Those of you who have been here and our regular viewers will know that this live stream thing can end up going in a number of different directions. But today's episode in particular was something I wanted to make an edited video of, which was just a follow-up of my video going into volume 1 or the first series of Love and Rockets. And I thought I would make multiple videos on series 2, series 3, and maybe series 4. And by the way, if you have no context of what I'm talking about, I will get into a little bit of a recap of my previous video further on in this live stream as well. But the more I wrestled with making that edited video, the more I realized that it's not just a mammoth task or a Sisyphean task, as Analog Comics, I believe, put it in one of his comments, but I was failing miserably at it. There's no question of me being able to execute something along the lines of everything I wanted to discuss or could be possible to discuss. So I thought that instead of trying to be overly disciplined or format oriented, I'd take a little bit more of a chilled out, laid back approach to this and have a live stream in which I kind of wandered among these comics more than have a plan of action. As I'll have a rough plan of action, but also I was hoping that there would be people in the comments and in the chat while it's live who may have some ideas of what they want to take a look at or questions they had, and it could be a much more conversational thing. If you're watching this later as a recording, I think the same thing still stands. You can take the view of what we talk about here and say, are there specific things that you'd like me to make a shorter, tighter, more edited video on? Is there a sort of deep dive that is more manageable in a bite-sized piece that could come out of the kind of things we explore or maybe just touch upon in this live stream? Which is not to say that this can't have a little bit of a deep dive aspect to it itself. This video, this live stream could, as I was thinking, get pretty nerdy or pretty chaotic, but I'd like to start being general, and that's also hopefully for people's attentions, because if it's a long live stream, you may not be able to watch the whole thing in one go, although I always admire and appreciate those who hang out for the entire session. But even in recordings, I think people come back a couple of times, and I've heard of people, people have told me that they like to watch it in bits and pieces. So the first piece will be a sort of how to get started with the first volume, how Love and Rocket started. And I'll take a few minutes to generally talk about the different ways that we today can get introduced to or start reading Love and Rockets by trying to be chronological or as close to chronological as we can be. There are, of course, other ways to read Love and Rockets. You could be non-chronological. You could start by, because in spite of running for over 40 years, it's still running by the same creators. So you could pick up something much more recent and much more contemporary than the 80s and 90s comics that we'll be talking about today. But this is how to get started if you wanted to be sort of a completionist, if you wanted to be sort of chronological, if you wanted to take one of those scholarly types of views, you're not dabbling in it. This is, I think, terminology I used in a video a very long time ago, how to get started reading Usagi Yojimbo, in which I talked about people as either dabblers or dilettantes or completionists, as in three approaches, not people, three approaches you could take. And it's similar, I think, with most long-running series and series that have a lot of issues or a lot of volumes. There are several different ways. There's no right or wrong or best way to do it, but depending on how you'd like to approach it, I'd like to be able to help no matter which approach you take. So today's video will sort of take that approach of what if I wanted to start with volume 1? What if I wanted to start with the earlier stories and not necessarily the absolute first ones, although we will start off at least going chronologically, but the first 50 issues of Love and Rockets that ran from 19, I have this written down so I can be quite professional about it. Of course, if I was professional, it would already be up on my screen. But yes, it ran from 1982 all the way to 1996. So from September 1982, which is when issue 1 came out, till April 1996, which is when issue 50 came out, 14 years saw 50 issues that comprise what is considered the first volume of Love and Rockets. And that is the subject of today's live stream. But talking about barreling on, I've forgotten about the technical hygiene things that I like to do right at the beginning of the live stream. So please do let me know if the audio is coming through all right, if you're getting it in both ears, if you're wearing headphones, or if you've got stereo, it's coming through the left and the right channel. It's synchronized to the visuals. I mean, a more professional channel wouldn't need all this, but in spite of all the live streams I've done, I continue to be wary of these technical glitches. So right at the offset, that's one thing that I like for people to check. And the other thing I'd like, just as we get warmed up, I'd love for people in the chat right now, or even in the recording, watching the recording later, to let me know where they're watching from, because this is one of the most fun things I like about this channel is the range of comments and viewer interactions I have, but also the fact that they're from all over the world. And I love hearing where people are tuning in from or where they're watching from later. So leave that in the chat, and I'd like to take a look at that. The other thing I thought of the other day, and this is because of a couple of viewers who do this when they watch the recordings of live streams, is they leave a comment when they start watching the live stream, and they comment and they reply to their own comment as a sort of commentary through the live stream, so they can do it even over the course of several days or viewing occasions. If that's something that interests you, that's a way that someone who's watching the recording can sort of get into the live aspect of it as well, commenting as we go along and then having a series. It's just something that I really enjoy when people do it. I go through every single comment and I love seeing their sort of moment by moment or scene by, or whatever, topic by topic discussion of things. And it's something that I'm thinking that I would do on other people's live streams and comments as well, because I usually either leave a comment right at the beginning of starting to watch it or when I'm ending it, and but the live chat continues. So that's one thing that did occur to me. Very quickly, let me go. Oh, lots of people in the chat now. When I looked the other time, it was just Ashwita and Sleepy Reader, but we've got over here Gore Vidal. Good to see you, sir. Pleasure to have you over here. And Gore Vidal says, never heard of Love and Rockets, which is, for those of you who don't know, a joke. Mr. Gore Vidal is a big fan of Love and Rockets and a devout, like, I was going to say like me, but probably much more than me, scholar of the series and a proponent and an evangelizer of it. So I'm very happy to see you here. Diverging evolutions of Jaime versus Gilberto. Very interesting question to start us off, Sleepy Reader, and it's definitely something we can get into. I've loved seeing the comments on my previous video, and I think that video got seen by more people who usually watch my videos. I mean, I usually have like 500 or 600 people watch, but that was quite popular, and I saw a lot of people whose names I am not familiar with. I'm pretty good with frequent commenters. I know who they are. For a tiny channel like this, it's not that hard, but I loved reading their comments and I loved reading people's opinions on things. And one of the most fantastic things I think in general about Love and Rockets, this series, and this is good for even those who are not familiar with the series. One of the most fascinating things about it is not only is it uh, to be very reductive, a love it or hate it kind of thing. I don't think hate it is the right phrase, but not only is it a divisive thing or a difficult comic for some people to get into, as I discussed in my previous video, it's also astonishing that people who love it don't have to love it unequivocally and every bit of it. And even more so, where they're completely fine saying, these things I really don't care about, or these things go completely over my head, or I find that indulgent, or I find that pretentious, or I find that irrelevant, or I find that irritating. Whatever they find that about certain things, and certain other things are fantastic. And they're all different. So there is very little unanimity. I mean, there are certain things, the Love Bungalows over there is one of those unanimous or close enough to unanimous things that people talk about, but even that has caveats. Once again, the way I talked about in my previous video. So the idea is some people say, I love Jaime, but I do not like Gilbert. And other people will say, I love Gilbert, but I don't like Jaime. Other people will be like, I love early Gilbert, but I do not like where he's gone after that. And the other people will be like, I didn't care for Gilbert's early stuff, but his later stuff really blows my mind and tickles my fancy. It's so interesting, the diversity of opinion. There is passion, but the fact that it can be pocketed, the fact that it can be segmented, but also be in absolute opposition to each other as opinions while completely understanding what the other person's saying. So if someone was to say to me, for example, that they love a part of the long-running comics anthology series that I don't care for as much, I'd get it. I can completely understand someone loving that and me not loving it. And I can also understand someone loving or not loving something that I do. So when we get to this question of, what is their evolution? What is the direction of evolution? I don't think we can separate ourselves from that. It'll be very much about what appeals to me. When did I read that? When did I read this? What works for me and what doesn't work for me? But the evolution aspect of it is, I think, a fantastic truth to it. There's no doubt that there is change and evolution. What one thinks of it, I think, is for us to decide, which is where the chat and comments come in. Hello from Barcelona. Good to see you here, Alex. I think Alex. Elan Reese, which versions are currently in print? That's a very good question, and that's something that we should address at the top of this live stream. As I was saying, I'll start off general and, instructive and then meander into irrelevance, maybe. Hello, Charbak Dipta, good to see you from Kolkata. Squire is here. We've got Gore is a bit of a character. Who else do we have? Analog Comics, Finland is online. Good to see you, Analog Comics. And we've got Silvano from Italy, Aris from Greece, Luke Bunny. Whoa, I scrolled too fast and now I lost my place. From Portland, Oregon. Excellent. Great to have you here. We've got Gore Vidal from Texas. Isn't there some Texas in every part of the world? There definitely is in my house, sir. Paddock's Classroom is tuning in from Scotland. Efrain is from Mexico. Great to see everyone here. Elan is from Wales. Thank you. Mark Tweedledale is here, but needs to get to bed soon. I completely understand. Ritvik Sharkar is here. He has started reading Jaime stories right from the start, and it's kind of starting to grow on him. Excellent. Excellent. Good to hear that. All right. I believe we are all caught up. We're all caught up with the comments. All right. So let's get started. And I think there was a question in the chat, which is a great question to start with, is what editions are currently in print? So over here, we're talking specifically about volume 1. And oh, I forgot to make one test, which is the B camera working? So we've got a very risky setup over here. I'm very nervous about knocking it over, but hopefully I should be able to move my microphone closer. I hope that's showing up clearly for everyone and you can the picture is clear, and I hope it's in focus. Do tell me if the focus shifts or it becomes soft, because I have this on manual focus because of technical reasons, but that's another flying by the seat of my pants sort of thing. But as long as that's working, oh, you might not have had my audio. Ah, well, we've got the professionalism hard at play. So what we have over here are 50 issues that were published over this period of time, and obviously being these magazine-sized comics, they are no longer in print, although they were reprinted many times. And for example, this copy of issue number 1, this is not the first printing from 1982. I believe if I look in the indica, it is the second printing from later in 1982. It just says fall 1982. So there are second and third and fourth printings of certain issues, especially amongst the earlier ones. And those can still be if you are in the United States, for example, or in a place that has access to back issues and websites like My Comic Shop, which is where I've picked up a number of issues to fill the gaps in my collection as well. Then you can still find these back issues, but I wouldn't consider them in print. They've also been reprinted a couple of times now in these trade paperbacks, and these trade paperbacks are a format that still continue, although they're not always trade paperbacks. So it's a little different. Like Music for Mechanics, which is the first trade, was published in hardcover and in paperback. This is a paperback reprint from many years later. But even the latest stories continue being collected and put together in such volumes. They tend to be graphic novels, so stories that are serialized in Love and Rockets. As they finish serialization, they see a collected printing of this kind. These early volumes are more anthology oriented, and current and later volumes are more author oriented, completing a full story and having other pieces appear somewhere else. So that's also one way of thinking about it as being in print. Again, used copies of these early volumes are possible. And so therefore, we're not talking about anything beyond volume 1. So I'm leaving out books like, I should have something over here, but the ones that I talked about, well, like the Love Bunglers back there or Julio's Day. These are collections that are in print and available. So many of them can still be purchased. If not absolutely brand new, you can find them quite easily in places where you have access to used comics and used books. But the most important things as far as volume 1 are concerned are what's called the Love and Rockets library. And the Love and Rockets library are these sort of mass market paperbacks that have been put together by collecting authors' Gilbert stories in volumes and Jaime stories in volumes separately. So Maggie the Mechanic, for example, is the first Jaime volume. And of course, it would be right at the bottom. I have not put these in order so much again, but I have lined up my box set, which in a previous shelf tour video had the volumes out of order, which meant this picture wasn't forming, and that created distress for a couple of my viewers. So I have had the respect for them to put this together in that way. But the first Gilbert volume, for example, is Heartbreak Soup, and some of what we'll talk about, we'll get into how these things are divided. But these are constantly being reprinted, and these are in print, and these would probably be the easiest and the most affordable way and in print availability across the world or wherever it's available. Many of these volumes I bought in India, for example, on Amazon or Bookswagon. So these are probably the easiest way to get into or start reading or dabble in Love and Rockets. They do have certain drawbacks. I don't know if drawbacks is the right word, but they all have different features. But as far as ease and convenience and availability, this is definitely the way to go. Which is not to say that there isn't. Of course, if I'd made this video a couple of years ago, that's essentially where it would have ended. But now we have this box set, which as of this episode is still in print And I think on Amazon US, the last I checked, is discounted to $250, which honestly is a deal. I think it's a $400 list price. I was lucky enough to get this at less than that, but it wasn't as low as $250. So $150 off from list is a bargain. But this is a facsimile hardcover boxed edition collecting all 50 issues of the first volume. So while these trades that we looked at, not looked at, will look at, these trades and these library volumes are sorted and arranged a particular way for narrative and for authorial purposes. This is exactly like having 50 of these issues just bound together in 5 different volumes, 6, 7 different volumes. What am I saying? There's one, two. That's because volume one. Anyway, we'll get into that. So I hope that answers that question for right now. But that's a great way to kick things off. Is volume one? How many ways can I read it? There are a couple of different ways that you can. You can seek out these issues. And I do have all these issues here. So if anyone wants to talk about a specific issue, that's something that maybe we could get into later. With these issues, you can seek them out as I did. First printings, I'm not very, I mean, they're in good condition, and I was glad to get them in good condition. And when I bought them, almost every issue I bought came bagged and boarded in some way. So I've continued to keep them in bags and boards, although bags and boards are not necessarily part of my comics behavior. With singles and with magazines, they are a necessity if I wish to preserve them. I'm not interested in slabs and I'm not interested in graded materials, but I do want them to last. And because of the looser covers, the staples, etc., they are a little fragile. So I double bag them. And that's another thing. I was like, do I have to take them all out of the bags? But it's a good thing because we can talk about bags and boards later. But these magazines are still available, as I said. So that's one way that you can seek them out if you have comic book shops, if you have local comic stores, eBay, if these are things you can access. For a lot of people internationally, that's not always possible. So we would need to seek out other things. But anyone who has these singles available to them, that's one way of seeking them out. Of course, there are 50 of them to get. Stories are split across multiple issues, but you do end up with everything, all of the attendant stories, not necessarily the main low-cast stories. For example, this one right in issue number 1 by Gilbert Hernandez, a crazy science fiction story that isn't collected in any of the Heartbreak Soup or Palomar volumes because it doesn't fit into those. There are multiple chapters, and sometimes a story is serialized within the same chapter. And so therefore those stories collected together will be what we see in the collections. But the magazines themselves do provide that sort of singular periodical approach, as well as possibly some of the best letters pages and the most acidic and what's the word I'm looking for? Verbose, but almost academically so. The way that people talk to the editors and to the authors in praise as well as criticism, I think, is a signature of this magazine. So that's the thing that these issues bring you. And of course, there is that magazine size, which not all editions necessarily deliver. Fantagraphics currently has a sale on their website, Sleepy Reader says. Ilana, are they available digitally to read somewhere? That's a very good question. I'm not quite sure, as I don't read digitally. I'm not aware of if there are ebooks of these. If anything, I would think that there would be there might be ebook versions of these library editions, the Love and Rockets library. And of course, illegally, I'm sure that you can find scans of these magazines and things like that. But I'm not sure about ebooks or Comixology. And if viewers or commenters know, please leave this as information for others. if they have a sale on their website, yes, I think it was one of their sales, not the first one, because I remember the year that this box set came out, it was exempt from the Fantagraphic sale because I suppose everyone wanted it. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the next year they made it a point to say that the sale includes the box this time, and that's when I picked it up, if I'm remembering correctly. What is the order of the softcover library editions, please? Excellent question, and that is definitely something we'll be covering. They are available on Comixology, Luke Bunny says. Excellent. That is good to know. So for anyone who's interested in reading them digitally, Love and Rockets does seem to be part of the Comixology library. So the questions are, how do we read Love and Rockets? And you can read them in the magazines. You can seek out the magazines, or you can seek out the trades, and you will have, I think at last count, there are 30 such trades, and they go from music for mechanics and Shalo's Burden. That's volume 1 and volume 2. And I think they're numbered. You see the 1 and the 2 on the spine over here. They're numbered all the way up to the end of the first volume, of the first 50 issues. So that would be up till volume 15. And from volume 15, they stopped being numbered and they just started being given names as graphic novels. And I think the vast majority of them from after the first volume onwards are labeled as graphic novels. And what's interesting is this collection format often expands things from what they were in the magazines, in the comics, in the issues. So the stories, when made into graphic novels, will often be fleshed out with extra pages created specifically for that collection, which makes for a slightly different, I mean, it's not a huge difference, but it makes for a slightly different experience. So reading it serialized chapter after chapter and reading it put together does have a difference for certain stories, not for all of them and not for the earliest ones, but I think from volume 4 or volume 5, not very, it didn't take very long for both Gilbert and Jaime to start adding extra pages. And I think when it comes to something like Julio's Day, which is way over in volume 3, the Love and Rockets new stories, it added the entire ending of that story because it was never finished within the comic series. So it was only in the graphic novel format that the entire second half, or maybe even 100 pages, were added to make it that graphic novel. So these trade collections, especially in the later volumes, definitely have something a little extra over the original magazines as well as that. And the good thing about the library editions is that they collect them as the complete stories or the fleshed out stories, the expanded stories of the trades, rather than the original comic book or magazine format. So I hope that is clear as mud. But the order of the trades is going to go for the first volume, Heartbreak Soup. For Gilbert stories, volume 1 would be Heartbreak Soup. Volume 2 would be The Girl from Hoppers. Volume 3. Oh, no, wait. I've completely reversed things. So let me start again. And this is why, you take the live stream and you cut it up later to make a better recorded video. Heartbreak Soup, Volume 1. Human Diastrophism, Volume 2. We've got Beyond Palomar, Volume 3. And Esperanza, Volume 4. Now, they're not all sequential. They can be read independently, but chronologically from the view of publication, that's the order the Gilbert stories go in. That is not to say that everything in this is absolutely chronological. There are some short stories that have been moved around for the sake of clarity and for introducing you to characters, or have been moved further back. And that is a thing that Love and Rockets fans have many arguments about. And that just comes down to, I think, how you read it originally when you were reading it in the magazines. For someone coming into it later, it may not make that much of a difference, and it may not actually be any issue. And when it comes to the stories of Jaime, Maggie the Mechanic is the first Jaime volume, to be followed by The Girl from Hoppers. And then you've got Perla la Loca. And I thought I had another one over here. Penny Century still back there. I can see it. 1 second. Now, I believe the reason I didn't take Penny Century out is because Penny Century is a collection of comics and stories that came after the ending of Volume 1 in magazine format. This came between Volume 1 and Volume 2 as a separate series of comics, just the way that Gilbert had series of comics. Both Jaime and Gilbert were making comics related to their Love and Rockets characters and world, but not under the Love and Rockets banner. That just adds more confusion to things, but that comes after Volume 1. Volume 1, for the most, is pretty clear. You go from issue 1 to issue 50. You've got multiple stories that are collected together in these trades. All 50 issues are made in that facsimile format, including the covers and the letters pages, as we will see in this box set. And then in author chronological order narratively in these library volumes. So I hope I didn't mess up over there, but let me know in the comments if I did. So Sleepy Reader says, so after I've read the box set, I still have to collect the trades. Yes, if you wish to be an absolute completionist, if you want to get the extra pages and the extra panels and the things they put in for the trade collections, you'll still have to seek them out. But there might be a better way to do it. I'm trying to think, and this is the thing that we can talk about next, is which is better, which is the best way to read it, and what do we mean by the best way? Of course, the stories out of the main continuity are collected in 2 different volumes, Efrain says. Yes, and that's absolutely right. So the main continuity, as I mentioned in my previous video, Gilbert stories are often referred to as the Palomar stories or the Heartbreak Soup stories, and Jaime stories are referred to as the Loca stories. Both of these universes have recurring characters and follow certain characters and a cast of literally hundreds. I'm not sure if this is right, but I think I read somewhere online that at last count, which was somewhere in 2005 or 2006, there were over 700 characters in these 2 main Love and Rockets storylines. So it's literally a cast of hundreds and can be overwhelming, part of the thing. But I would say that the Loca stories and the Heartbreak Soup stories are the ones that we have seen highlighted in these volumes. But there are volumes, I think one of them is Amor y Cohetes, which collects all of the short stories that aren't related. And then there is another one that does the same thing. And similarly, in the trades, later on, you'll have Gilbert Hernandez's Fear of Comics, and then the trade, one of the library volumes called Comics Dementia. These are the most out there absurd one-pagers and gag comics that have very little to classify them, apart from the fact that they're written and drawn by Gilbert Hernandez and they appeared in the pages of Love and Rockets. So, for example, in the first issue, when we look at the table of contents that we see over here, none of these stories that are written by Gilbert Hernandez appear in any of the library volumes that I showed over here. The Gilbert stories do appear here in Music for Mechanics, but because they're not part of the Paloma stories, the ones in issue number 1, they do not appear in volume 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these editions, which is why it can seem confusing to people, but it's really not that hard if you think about it from the point of view of, say, something like 2000 AD or an anthology comic that's similar. You can imagine having multiple issues of 2000 AD over the years, and you can see certain storylines being collected together in their own trade paperbacks. And then you can also see sort of author spotlights or author stories over a long period. It's not obviously a one-to-one comparison, but it's quite, if you think about it, as I mentioned in my previous video, if you think about Love and Rockets as a two or sometimes three writer artists, auteur, comics creators anthology, they themselves, it's not just an anthology by having three different or two different creators. It's also an anthology because they're doing long form stories and short form stories. They're doing medium form stories. They're doing certain stories that take place over 5 or 6 different issues. They're doing certain stories that take place over 2 issues. In certain cases, you may have a single issue have two stories about the same set of characters, something that they did many years ago and something that's happening now, given to you in two stories. So the way they play with format, the way they play with narrative, the way they play with time and the aging of their characters, all of these things are sort of signature, hallmark, unique identifiers of Love and Rockets. So the ways that they've been collected together, I think, reflects this struggle of how do you classify this work and how do you take what has been published in a particular way as a periodical. There were attempts to make it a bi-monthly, and it was a bi-monthly for a while, and then not an irregular schedule, but more of a semi-annual, like twice a year, and in some years only one issue, and in some other years you have 4 issues. When you've got this kind of a schedule and stories that are being told at different times and different paces, putting them together itself, I think, is a little bit of a puzzle box challenge. And each of these editions presents a different thing for people to talk about and a different thing for us to pick upon. What do we have in the comments? I jumped in not knowing anything about the characters of the stories, Gore Vidal says. Didn't know it was an anthology, but I picked up the comic and was immediately engaged. And this is a fantastic thing, I think, about comics, and this is something that I think I touched upon in my last live stream, not my Love and Rockets video as well, is sometimes I think we're a little too like, I have to start from the beginning. I have to have everything clarified. I have to know what's going on. I have to know what I'm getting into, and it's got to fit into certain expectations. And I understand that because our time is precious and we don't want to waste it. But the adventure of discovery and finding something that doesn't quite slot into what you know before, but does remind you, because you can see that these people know what they're doing and they are fans of comics first and foremost. I think that joy comes from just sort of throwing yourself into it and seeing what happens. Comic Art Channel says, if you don't have the box set, I'd read with trades or OOP deluxe hardcover books. Get the box set if you loved reading it. I think fair enough. I think the whole thing is about how much money do I want to spend, because Comic Art Channel also mentions OOP deluxe hardcover books. Now, that's this stuff over here. So all of the volume 1 Locus stuff can be found in this hardcover volume, which was published, and I believe it might have been reprinted once, but now is severely out of print and is quite expensive. I think the cheapest I've seen this for after I bought it a long time ago, and I didn't pay that much for this one or the Palomar thing that we have here. Actually, why am I holding it over here? Let me go ahead and these hardcovers are out of print, and these hardcovers seem to me to be quite expensive on eBay or Amazon US when you're looking for something secondhand. Now, the other thing, and there are lots of things to praise about these hardcovers, particularly their production quality and the high quality art paper that's used, which is very different from the newsprint of the magazines, but it seems to be even finer than the ones in the trades. So the trades have a slight yellowness to them, which might be because of their age, but they also have a slight transparency, nothing compared to the transparency. You know what? Let's just take it over here. I'm moving my microphone. Let's do a comparison. But since we're looking at Heartbreak Soup, let's not do a comparison with this volume. we're going to take a look at Chelo's Burden, which is where this story, that was the short story. Here we go. So when you, oh dear, I'm already out of desk space. I don't know how. I took 3 days to clear out my desk to do this, but here we go. So as you can see, and I hope the camera can show you this, this paper for the trade is slightly transparent. So when I hold it up like that, I can see the letters from Heartbreak Soup on the other side of the page. Now this might just be because it's an older thing and it's wearing out, but I've kept them in good condition, and even if I bought them used, then you can see that slight yellowing that comes from that. That is a lot more. That's a lot more deluxe in this hardcover. You've also got the size, which I think is comparable, but let's check that as well since we have them here. I think the margins. Yes, the size is the same. So we've got the magazine size. That's one of the things that the trades, as well as the out of print deluxe hardcovers, have. They maintain that magazine format size. But the quality of the paper and the way that it is printed and the way that the blacks look, I think in particular, because for this black and white comic, you've got two artists who know it seems like a cliche way to put it, but they know what they're doing with their blacks. You've got, the influence that we were talking about. You can see the influence of so many comics artists, newspaper artists, as well as comic book artists in the Brothers Hernandez's work. And these hardcovers are just an absolute joy. If we look at, let's switch to the Music for Mechanics trade. And here we can take something from the very first issue. Here you have the newsprint, and I think the paper's held up quite well over the years. It's not yellowed a lot, but it is so it's not rough newsprint, but it is, you've got that transparency, so you can see that in the pages, but it doesn't interfere with the reading at all. That, when you look at it in this form, sees an upgrade as far as the glossiness is concerned, but there is that aforementioned slight thinness of paper, and I think that is something that afflicts only the earliest trades. I don't think that the current volumes that are being published, especially the hardcovers, have this issue. And I wouldn't really call it an issue because the density of the artwork, even in pages like this, it's not really disruptive to the reading experience. But you can see that this is of a much higher quality. Definitely art paper reproduced in terrific black and white. Now, the only thing about these two hardcovers, as opposed to these trades or collecting all 50 of these singles or the box set, for example, is that they only collect the main story. So only the Loca stories, none of the extras, none of the, well, I wouldn't say extras, but none of the other short stories or even the other serialized stories are there in this, which is similar to what we see in volumes like Maggie the Mechanic. But as someone pointed out, there are volumes of this library that collect those other stories, whereas over here, you just get the Loca stories and nothing else. And in the Jaime volume, it's comprehensive. As far as I can make out, it's absolutely comprehensive. Every single Loca story that is there in the first 50 issues is collected in this table of contents. And that might be something really academic or nerdy to get into, is to actually make a comparison on a chapter by chapter basis by going through these issues. But while the Locus volume is comprehensive, I know that I have found discrepancies, or let's say I found missing things in the Palomar volume. So the Palomar volume is definitely an abridged volume when it comes to all of the Palomar stories within that world, within that continuity. All of the Palomar stories that appeared in the first 50 issues of Love and Rockets are not part of this Palomar hardcover. So this is definitely an abridged version, and it's superb in many ways. I think the cover design and the interior design might even outstrip the Locas Jaime volume, although I'm not really comparing. And we've got a similar terrific printing and ink reproduction over here. The fact that both of these volumes, this Palomar volume and this Locas volume put together, are, I think they'd be about $200. Let's say they're $180. $180 for just the Locas and the Palomar stuff, and not even all the Palomar stuff, when that box set, when this box set is currently available for 250, which is of course marked down and on sale. I don't know. I mean, like, I hate to talk about books and as if they're vegetables and fruits. But if I'm just thinking about bang for your buck, the fact that these are out of print is what's hiking their price up. That wasn't their list price. I don't think was $99 each or anything like that. I think they were $40 each, and that makes perfect sense. And I think even if they were available for $50 each, and if you can find them for $50 each, I think they're superb hardcovers. But if you're going for all, if you're going for everything, if you want to replicate, the magazines, and buying the magazines 50 or getting the box would be the way to go through it. Or if you can find these trades cheap, and they were reprinted, and if you're, again, as I say, in a place that has eBay, some of these trades I picked up for like $5 or $4. So it's not always going to be that way. And in some cases, it was $12, $15. But I didn't pay I didn't pay any out of print prices for any of these. I only have 10 of these paperback trades, and then I have some later volumes, but that's because I've got all the issues and I bought them all in different at different times, etc. But it's an interesting conundrum to have, and I think it becomes about what do you find available, what is there around you. These two hardcover volumes are handsome, beautiful volumes, and I think until this box set that came out was sort of unsurpassed as far as the quality and the love given to reproducing these volumes. But given the fact that they are out of print, and given the fact that they are hard to find, and given the fact that last I checked, they seem to command pretty high prices, although that might be different now. I think the prices of used or out of print books are often affected by what reprints come out. So the fact that the box set is out and the fact that the trades might be being reprinted might have reduced the price on these, in which case they would be definitely worth picking up if you can find them for a bargain. So these are the deluxe hardcovers being talked about. You can get it. These are all the Loca stories, and these are most of the Heartbreak Soup stories from volume 1. So with these two volumes, you would have the vast majority. You'd have pretty much all of the main stories and the main continuity that people talk about as far as the Heartbreak Soup and Loca stories are concerned. That bottle dropping to the ground is noisy at the best of times, but with the microphone, I'm just hoping that the audio isn't ringing in your ears. I prefer matte paper for black and white comics, Vincent says. Yep, fair enough. Oh, I see Ashwita has deleted a message. Now I must have missed it. Some spam, or maybe something even spicier. So Analog Comics says that if I only buy library trades, I don't get all the stories. No, that's not true. If what you're talking about is the library trades like these ones, and you keep buying them, there will be volumes that will put them together. They just won't put them together sequentially the way they were over here, where you would have part one of a long story and you'd have two short stories that are unrelated to that. So they take the long stories and they put them into certain volumes, and they take the short stories and they put them into some other volumes. They take the related stories and have them in certain volumes, and the ones that are not related. So if you stick to the trades and if you buy all of these trades, you will eventually get all of the stories. You'll just get them collected in a different way. You'll get them collected by theme, if you want to think about it that way. Um, have I ever tried to draw a comic? No, I can't draw. The best I can do is sort of vaguely storyboard stuff in a very gestural sort of foreground, background type of way, but I do like the idea of writing comics. Um, Wigwam Bam trade 15 or so years ago, Efrain says, was his first Love and Rockets trade. Yes, and this is the thing where I think Wigwam Bam might be volume 15 or. Hold on, where's my document? I have this somewhere written down, don't I? Yes, volume 11, just after volume 10. So Love and Rockets X is volume 10, and Flies on the Ceiling that this order is also something worth commenting about. Volume 11 is Wigwam Bam, and volume 12 is Poison River, and volume 13 is Chester Square. And I think those three books, Wigwam Bam, Poison River, and Chester Square, are often cited as three great books to pick up of the early Love and Rocket stuff as great stories, and people often recommend. I've seen people recommending them as gateway comics. Now, for people who've been reading the previous 10 trades, remember again, the trades are between two different worlds. So Wigwam Bam and Chester Square, for example, are in Jaime's world, and Poison River and Blood of Palomar, Flies on the Ceiling, are in Gilbert's universe. So when you say 10 volumes, it's not just 10 volumes of one story. You can think about it broadly as 5 volumes of one story and 5 volumes of another story. Once again, the 5 volumes of one story, because of its vignette-ish slice of life and absurdist nature, as well as the number of flashbacks and interconnection of past and present in these stories, they are all, I think, independently readable. You will get things that obviously are based on things that have happened before, but it's not like cliffhangers that you have to read the next issue to make sense of what you're reading now. The difficulty of talking about Love and Rockets is the difficulty in having anything to compare it to. Even if you think about, and I've gone through this exercise in which I was saying, wow, supposing I tried to make an elevator pitch for Love and Rockets. Supposing I wanted to say it's like this meets that. What would I say? And this is a game that I would ask for people who know Love and Rockets to play with me as well, so they can help people who don't know Love and Rockets get some sort of an idea, or maybe completely mess with their ideas of what it is. And, would you say it's like Marquez meets David Lynch? Would you say it's like The Wire meets, like you keep searching for these kind of things of like, where is storytelling done in this manner? And it's very hard to find something, which is again one of those things that, irrespective of what your judgment of the series or the stories ends up being, the fact that it is so odd and unique and its own thing, even if it's not for you, I think you'll still recognize that it's very hard to find something else that it's similar to. It's got obviously pieces of things, and I see that someone had mentioned in the comments Archie Comics, and for me, I don't know anything about the LA punk scene. I don't know anything about Central American hamlets and towns, and the thing that I did know was Archie Comics. I knew a lot of Archie Comics. I'd read a lot of Archie Comics, and when I looked at Love and Rockets, no matter what kind of story I was looking at, no matter how weird it was, there were things in it that reminded me of superhero comics and Marvel and DC comics as well, and they were extremely comicsy. They were cartoonish in the best possible way. They weren't, I think when you think about slice of life, or when you think about alt comics, or if you think about underground comics, you think about things that are aggressive in a particular way, or they are representing things as if it's film, and this is not that. This is very much, I think the early comics were postmodern kind of larks. They were kind of spoofs and satire almost in certain ways, but irrespective of how serious or how grave certain things were, the expressions of people, the way that their bodies moved, and they, even when you look at things like that, these are extremely, for lack of a better phrase, comicsy. Whether you're looking at old pulp American comics, whether you're looking at, and Archie comics was a thing that I found very, very influential, I could say, on this. And later, when I read interviews or heard the brothers talk about it, and I heard them mention Archie comics, I felt very smart. I was like, wait, I knew it. It felt like in fact, I had an Archie comics artist who was my favorite artist, but I didn't know who he was because, like Karl Barks, a lot of these Archie comics didn't used to have names, or at least I didn't see them in the comics that I read. Dan DiCarlo was a name that I recognized, and Harry Lucy was a name that I recognized. And both DiCarlo and Lucy's art stylings I can find echoes of, particularly in Jaime's Loca stories, which is what I'm trying to find right now. But the sort of facial expressions, and while it's being, this sort of and the little beads of sweat or perspiration bursting out, and the kind of large mouths shouting, a lot of these things are taking the vocabulary of these older comics and these stylings and putting them into these unique and hitherto unseen sort of scenarios, whether it is the rural things, the stories of Gilbert, or the urban stories of Jaime. Magical realism meets Archie and much of the history of comics. Yes, I know. Magical realism, Archie is a way of looking at things, and I think that especially with the Loca stories, but again with Gilbert's stories as well, the influence of Archie is this kind of, I don't mean just in the drawing style. It's that sort of energy and the expression. But then Archie is also a story about young people and teenagers, and where Archie has this sort of idealized view and this very white bread, sanitized television. I wouldn't say Norman Rockwell exactly, but very Happy Days sort of aspect to it, which even in the 80s was somewhat of a throwback. It was a little stodgy in, for American readers, I'm sure, who were reading very hip and exciting new comics. But the way that young person's story and dating and teenagers or 20 something year olds and their relationships, it's a much more adult, complex way of looking at it in Love and Rockets. But the fact that they use that Archie iconography is perfect. And I think it's when thinking about the great Archie influenced adaptations, I've talked about Afterlife with Archie a number of times, but also The Last of the Innocent, that Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips criminal story, that stands out as like, oh look, there's a dark, grim, gritty, and that's very much based on Archie. But I think Love and Rockets, and particularly the Loca story, should also be thought of in some ways as great Archie adaptations, but sort of, there's your gritty, realistic Archie. This is a thing that I honestly do believe, that it took that sort of depiction of America and said, well, what about the barrio, and what about women, and all kinds of women, and what about these kind of issues, and what about these kind of relationship problems? And it was fantastic. And I think that influence has a lot to do with how fantastic it felt for me, because as I was saying, there's a lot of background, or there's a lot of information that I don't have, and there's a lot of context I'm missing. So how can I get into this comic series? And this is a question that a lot of people, I think, bring up about things like Love and Rockets or others, is that you just need to have that context. That's why certain bland things can travel all over the world, and certain specific artistic things cannot, because they are so specific that they somehow cannot be related to outside of their context, but it's art, first of all. And for me, it was the comic storytelling, the fact that they were superhero comics readers, the fact that they had read Archie, the fact that they had read probably Modesty Blaze and Pulp and adventure comics and Conan and many other things that I'm not aware of, but it's things that I had read or had some familiarity with as well. So instead of it being the world and the universe that was something that was relatable, it was the vocabulary and the presentation that was relatable. But then the story you're telling is like nothing I've seen before. So I do think that there are different ways to gain entry, and it doesn't always have to be about sharing a context. There's a universality to the art style. And again, by art, I don't mean drawing. I mean, there's a universality to the presentation of something that I think Love and Rockets does fantastically. Thank you very much, Sergio, for the kind words. There's a lot of different conversations going on over here, but I'm not going to get into that because I'm going to get lost. Or maybe I can get into that while I take another sip of water. Hey, Gore Vidal's talking about Modesty Blaze. Love and Rockets, Aris says, Love and Rockets is like meeting old people and acquaintances after a year. There are pieces of information and mentions of people you heard or met at some point or haven't heard of. Yes, I think that's what might bother some people, but I also think that's one of the most reassuring things I can say. If you pick up a copy or a story of Love and Rockets and go, I have no idea who they're talking about, that's fine. Sometimes you're not supposed to have an idea of who they're talking about. And even at other times, if you have met this character before, you've met that character before like 5 years ago in the background of some party that someone person was talking about, or that guy they used to hang out with at the garage way back then. That's who this person is. It's okay because it kind of creates a sense of life where it's like meeting friends, but it's also like meeting strangers. And it's also like meeting someone where you're not sure if they're supposed to be a stranger or not. And then you've got that sort of not in media res, but the reason why I think about The Wire or another television show like Deadwood is isn't it isn't interested in explaining and spelling things out for the audience. And that to me displays a sort of trust in the reader to say that you're smart enough, you'll figure it out. And even if you don't figure it all out, it's not supposed to be all figured out anyway. You sort of live in that moment and you see that little thing unfold in front of you, and then the moment's done. And then there's a scene, and then after that scene, there is another scene. And sometimes you're not sure how you move from here to there, but you always kind of get the picture. And that's where the craft of the storytellers come in, is even the confusion, even the sort of loss is a very pleasant confusion and a pleasant loss. It feels very immersive and it feels very authentic. So whether or not you understand every single relationship or recognize every single character is secondary to whether you think these are living, breathing people who are interacting with each other. And if that is happening in front of you, it's like being out on the street rather than being at the movies, in which they've got to explain something to you because they've got 1.5 hours in which to get you a story. And this is that sort of glimpse and window into people's worlds. So it's absolutely, it's an absolutely different experience. Sleepy Reader says the layers of influence are smoothly integrated. Absolutely, and I think it's that smooth integration, that idea of where the Jack Kirby comic and that Archie comic and that Alex Toth artwork can all come together without them seeming like separate fragmentary pieces. Like, oh, now I'm going to do a little bit of a, how we've seen it. It's like, now I'm going to do this story, which is going to be a crime story. So I'm going to do this in this noir style. And then over here, I'm going to do an adventure story. So I'm going to do it in an adventure style. And don't get me wrong, I love that kind of stuff, but it's very performative. So as much as I love something that says, oh, so when I'm talking about the golden age, I'll use the golden age style. And then when we get to the silver age, I'll use the silver age style. We know what that is. And that's sort of referential. But this is a very different thing. It's to say that I'm going to take the techniques of noir, I'm going to take the techniques of comedy, I'm going to take the techniques of romance comics, and I'm going to use them to give you a sense of loneliness or companionship. I'm going to create a sense of community or isolation. The larger storytelling is being done by the vocabulary and the things that we know, but we know them associated with certain things. And I think what Jaime and Gilbert do so well is to say these things don't have to be used only for this, they can be used with the same effects. And that's what I think makes them such great and unique chefs, really, where they've understood the components, they've understood the fundamentals, but they're not interested in just regurgitating them in the same way. They want to use that for doing different things. All right, so what do we got next? What we can do now is, I think, take a quick look through what is in what, because I think that's an important thing for people. But before we jump into that little bit, I'd just like to quickly reiterate that this volume, this box set, the first 50 from Fantagraphics, collects the entire the first 50 issues, as the title says. And it's gorgeously designed. It's very well designed. And I'll probably have a follow-up close-up look at the video. And so in this live stream, you can let me know what you'd like to see about this book. But you can see, first of all, that the covers are all put together, which was one of the things. Oh, we can talk about the trades, but the trades do have the covers, but the library editions, they won't have the covers. So this is a big thing, because the Love and Rockets covers are dynamic and extremely influential. And this has that matte-ish sort of paper, more than the glossy art paper that we saw in the deluxe hardcovers. This is the thing that I think one of the commenters over here was saying is their preference for black and white, and I completely understand it. That glare that sometimes comes off the light on the glossy is not, but the blacks, there's some people who really appreciate black, and they appreciate the glossy black, and I admit that it looks beautiful. But I will say that yes, the matte one where the black sinks inwards rather than pops outwards makes for, in many ways, a more, well, I don't want to get it is subjective, but I'll agree that I think as long as you have the right thickness, as long as you have the right grammage and prevent that transparency and prevent the bleed through to the other side, I think that the matte paper works really, really well for this. Now, when looking at the size, the box set also maintains the library size of the original magazines, which is great. But I wonder if they were to do further box sets, if they did a box set for volume 2 of Love and Rockets, would they make it magazine sized? Because volume 2 was all comic book sized. Would you have a box set that's a smaller size next to the first 50, the next 20? They have to call it the next 20, right? But it might not be. But my point is that you're not losing any size when it comes to the magazine size pages. You're getting fantastic production, but that's all you get in these volumes. The final volume is not actually a collection. The final volume isn't part of the anthology. The final volume is actually academic. Well, not really academic, but it's work about Love and Rockets, and it's related material. And this itself is probably a book that Fantagraphics could sell by itself. I don't know whether they take it out of the box and sell it separately. There are always questions for like special books that are created, but as a record and as paraphernalia associated with this, including things that have not been reprinted and things from outside of Love and Rockets, the magazine, is a terrific volume. So apart from the 50 issues collected in these beautifully designed books, you also have this other volume from Rockets to Love, 1981 to 1986. But that's the that's the last volume in this box set. So the covers, what was I saying? Oh yes. So these volumes also include all of the covers, and they include them, as I was saying, they're facsimile. So they go in that order. They give you the back and the front covers, and that's gorgeous here. So you get the thing, and you don't even have any barcodes or anything like that. So they're pretty clean. They do maintain the price and the numbers. It gives you that nice magazine feeling, but you've got everything else inside reproduced exactly the way it was in the magazines. What I also like is the fact that they have that in there, so they lay flat and you can see the full image without having that gutter loss, which is a good way of dealing with a magazine that was stapled. Once you put it into binding, you've got to change that design a little bit. I mean, it might seem fairly obvious, but I don't think everyone does that, and so that's really wonderful production all around. Now, we can say then, well, there's this and there's this, so that must leave these these trades sort of in the dirt. They don't have the letters, they don't have anything else. But the one thing that they do have is they do have cover galleries in the back, and the covers are in black and white. And that is a thing that I think is kind of rare, to see these iconic, famous covers in black and white. It's sort of the inked. It's not as if it's pencils. It's not an artist edition. It's just black and white covers for the issues that are collected in each trade, the front and the back, which is fantastic. And this is the only place I think I've seen these black and white covers. I'm trying to remember if the book of covers has them in black and white, but it doesn't. There is a collection of all the covers of the first volume in a separate volume, which was something you would buy before this box set came out. All right. It sounds interesting and unique, Analog Comics says. It absolutely is. You should check it out and probably go in this direction, because I think if you read Heartbreak Soup, and as I was saying in my previous video, I don't know if Maggie the Mechanic... Oh, let me take us back to the single. Sorry, I told you it was going to be a slightly chaotic affair, because what occurs to me, and just keep putting stuff into the comments and in the chat, which will help me figure out what to do after this. When we look at these issues, the first issue is quite a thick issue, and that was the case for the first 4 issues. So there's a $3.50 price tag on it, and I believe it's 60. Wait, that can't be right. Yes, 68 pages, but 68 pages counting the covers. So that's interesting, where I guess that's the way magazines do it. So 68 pages, if this is page 1 and this is page 2. So this, for example, is page 3. So that 68-page magazine at the price of $3.50 was what the first issue was, and the first issue came out in September of 1982. But the second issue did not come out until April of 1983, so 7 months later. And as interesting and as cool as the first issue is, many would say that the second issue showed a phenomenal leap. And I think it was the brothers realizing that they now had an anthology magazine on their hands and not just a one-shot zine that they had created and stapled. So these issues, 1, 2, so this is $3.50. The second issue is, well, no. Yes, it's $3.50 in the US, $5.25 in Canada. That goes to $3 in the US, $3.50 in Canada, keeping it at 68 pages. And issue number 3 is also $3, 68 pages, and issue number 4 is the same. And it is from issue number 5, which is obviously going to be something that I have now misplaced. But let's take 6 as an example. The price of 6 falls to $1.95 because we're now down to 32 pages. And I'm going to confirm that. Yeah. So it goes down in size, and that's why in the box set, when you look at the facsimile collection, the first volume, and this won't be in focus because of that thing I told you, but the first volume is issues 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's just 5 issues in this volume. Whereas in the subsequent volumes of this, the same thickness is applied to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So you can see that the hardcover volumes also reflect the fact that the first 4 issues were double the size of subsequent issues. And this probably had something to do with the timetable and them having to deliver this on this schedule, because after the gap of 7 months between the first issue and the second issue, you've got third issue coming out 2 months later, and the fourth issue coming out 3 months later, and then the fifth issue took 6 months to come out. So you average about 2 or 3, and then they announce it as a bi-monthly. And then for a while, from May of 1984, from number 6 onwards, it was a bi-monthly until 85. So for a year, for the next 6 issues, you did get an issue of Love and Rockets every 2 months. And after that, it became a little bit more like every 3 months, and then every 2 months, every now and then 4 months. And then sometimes you would have a longer gap. But it's kind of phenomenal that this kind of density and this kind of storytelling was done by, remember, both are writer artists. They're doing their own lettering, they're doing their own layouts. Things are complex, and it's a story that is a number of nested stories and long stories. So it's quite an achievement. And I think cutting it down from 64 pages to 32 pages was absolutely necessary for them to bring it out with the kind of regularity that they were able to bring it out for the first couple of years. So we've got issues 1 and 2. That's this one and this one. And 1 and 2 are collected in the first trade paperback, which is Music for Mechanics. So the interesting thing about the first trade is that it collects, and like the first few trades do, it collects Jaime stories and Gilbert stories all together. However, they're not necessarily in the order that they appeared. So here is the table of contents, and these are all the chapters that you have in issue 1 and issue 2. But for example, Bem by Gilbert is on page 17 and runs till page 57. So it's a 40-page story by him, and it's all in sequence. And Bem is a 40-page, well, it's not, I don't think it's 40 pages, but it is, yeah, it is 40 pages, but it's split up. So if you look at the first issue, Bem chapter 1 is on page 3, chapter 2 is on page 19, chapter 3 is on page 29. So even this 40-page story is split into multiple parts within this issue. So you get a chapter and then you read some other stuff, then you come back to it, then you read some other stuff. And a lot of Jaime stuff is also that way. And that is put all together as one story when it's collected in the trade. But it's these two 62-page issues whose contents make up Music for Mechanics. So that means that Music for Mechanics has no Palomar stories in it at all. It does get the early Maggie and Hopi and Loca stories from Jaime started, the more science fictional and out there in working on the pro-solar mechanics, and one of the running gags is it's never explained what a pro-solar mechanic is, but you've got this kind of outlandish world, but you've also got these other stories that are very, again, steeped in comics, but they're not necessarily the longer epic narratives that Gilbert would be famous for. There are some great short stories, very funny ones, like Monsters, that are collected from these issues into this. But for many people, I think in the trades, and I think I've seen somewhere Gilbert at least say this, the second trade, Cello's Burden, is the one that is recommended for people to pick up. This is things from issues 3 and 4. So issues 1 and 2 is in Music for Mechanics. Issues 3 and 4, of course I've lost 4 now. It wasn't enough for me to use 5 only. But issue number 3 is really where I think, for me, this is where I started getting into it. This contains not only the beginning of Gilbert Hernandez's Palomar stories and Heartbreak Soup, Sopa de Gran Peña, which was the thing that hooked me, but it also gives you a Maggie and Hopi story that tells you more about their relationship, and where it's been sort of punks in science fiction setting, this starts the more realistic grounding, even though there is also another Maggie story which is still in that sort of more science fiction trappings world. And you've got a story by Mario as well, who's a rare contributor to Love and Rockets, but has contributions over the years that are also part of the collections. And it's this Locas Tambien story and Heartbreak Soup make number 3 the real earliest high point of this comic, which is not to say 1 and 2 didn't blow the minds of people when they were published because of where they were. But I think today, when looking at them, we can look at them more as a historical artifact and where this great series got started and how this was unlike anything people had seen before. And we can still appreciate it from that point of view. But for me, the stories that I loved reading and really enjoyed reading sort of picked up from volume 3 onwards and issue 3 onwards. So issue 3 and 4 collected in Cello's Burden makes Cello's Burden the trade to start with as well. Just in the way that I recommended in my previous video that Maggie the Mechanic, although technically the start, Maggie the Mechanic contains the stories that are in issues 1, 2, and a little bit of 3. And it's the girl from Hoppers that would be the place for a new reader looking to get hooked, that I would recommend to be the place that they sample Jaime's stories if they want to start from earlier stories and instead of going to the absolute earliest. So The Girl from Hoppers, the second volume of the Jaime stories, as well as Heartbreak Soup, the first volume of the Gilbert stories, both get their start in Cello's Burden the Trade. So volume 2 of the trades, just like volume 2 for Jaime of the Love and Rockets library, is probably the safest bet or the best chance one has. Of course, if the issues are where you are, supposing you couldn't find issue 1 and 2, you could only find 3. It's great. Get 3. 3 is great. 3 is fantastic. 3 is where it starts. 3, 4, and 5 would be what I would say should be, like I understand key issues and things like that. It's always number 1 because of its historical reason, but, or a key issue is where a character first appeared. I've always thought key issues should be not the ones in which the character lives or the character's introduced or a character dies, but the one that has the greatest storytelling, the one that did the most to the medium. So when looking at collecting singles, which sometimes, you get the itch for things you really like and you want to put yourself, at least I do, put myself into the shoes of people who went into the local comic book store and found this on the shelves or the spinner racks. When I want to indulge myself in that way and I seek out these singles, sometimes I'm surprised that what I thought would be very expensive and very rare because of how fantastic it is it's just available because it's not a key issue in other ways. So I don't know what my point is. My point is sometimes you can get great comics for not that. I mean, like we talk about how expensive things are, and of course, I don't know. I think Love and Rockets #1 might be hard to get at at a cheap price. But again, since there are like 5 reprintings, maybe something that is in fine condition. I mean, it doesn't have to be 9.8 on the CGC scale or something like that. But issue #3, I think, is a fantastic issue. I was making a series of videos called Single Issues I Love, and this would have been on that if I'd continued that series, because Love and Rockets #3 is where Love and Rockets takes off for me. Oh, takes off. I didn't even realize that. What do we have in the comments? What am I? Oh, there's a lot. The Palomar stories are so messy, so real. All of the stories, I think even the look, but they're very different storytellers and they do things very differently. So it's a great thing to keep talking about. But yes, I love the mess of these stories. I love how messy the characters' lives and choices and behavior is, and how wonderful the art is. It's that fantastic. Even with Gilbert, I know Jaime gets most of the praise for being such a beautiful, luscious artist, but Gilbert, I think, is a master cartoonist. His expressions and his emotions, and it's almost, it's a thing that I've seen happen with manga and anime's popularity in particular. I've seen people becoming more accepting of something that's expressionistic rather than only be realistic. And I think something like Love and Rockets, which comes across as, oh, here's the realistic, real world stories, having those kind of expressions and having those kind of, as I was saying, the kind of pop eyed hair going up, and, it's as if you've gotten an electrical shock or something like that, having those cartoony representations be used in moments of domestic strife and even of comedy, but a sort of real life messy comedy is part of the brilliance. The $3 price Gore Vidal says was high, given that DC and Marvel comics were 60 cents at the time. Yeah, I can imagine that. And I think that might be one of the reasons why they went for the magazine format, is that it's got a nice heft to it and it doesn't feel like a floppy. It doesn't feel like a comic book. It kind of separates it from that comic book thing. I'm not sure about the first issue that was self published, the ones that the brothers sent to Fantagraphics before Fantagraphics decided to reprint them. I think it was Gary Groth or Kim Thompson. It was Fantagraphics' decision to have it be magazine sized in order to separate it. But I can just imagine that 60 cents and $3.50, that's a huge difference. I remember someone saying this to me about Chris Ware or Art Spiegelman comics, saying that you would go into your comic book store and you would see that, but you'd see, an issue of Acme Novelty Library, and it was like $6 or $10 as opposed to a $1.50 comic or something like that. I'm not sure if I'm remembering those numbers correctly, but given the size of the print run and given the production of something like that, I can see why that would be. But I can see that being a big deterrent for catching on, for catching a mass market. But I suppose they knew that they didn't have a mass market book on their hands. Um, what do we have? Hardcover collections are, but every single floppy collector at heart. I think every issue floppy is a dangerous thing that I have fallen victim to, even though I'm so remote and I don't live anywhere near local comic book store sort of environments. It is a very tempting thing. I'm always doing it retroactively. I'm never doing it at the time. It's always like I read something or I love something and I'm like, oh, I want to get every single issue of that. It's that little collector bug that I try to keep tempered, but for certain things. But I never want to be like, I want to get that key issue, or I want to, I mean, if it's a story, that's different, but most of the time it ends up being, I loved Astro City. I want every single issue of Astro City because I want to pretend that I was going to a comic book store every Tuesday or Friday and picking up an issue of Astro City and then reading it and then waiting for the next one. I want to pretend that. And then then you end up with, dozens and dozens and dozens of copies, and you're like, oh, I have number 15 but not number 16, and I've got two of number 17 because I bought it in a lot. It does become a Pandora's box. And I think, also thinking about this thing from the point of view of bagging and boarding, is like, I've often talked about how I don't like to have my books out of reach. So when people talk to me about dust and things like that, I'm like, look, I'll take a little bit of dust and I'll vacuum and I'll clean my shelves. One of my most popular videos is how I clean my shelves. But I want them accessible. I want to be able to pick out a book and get it. And it really irritates me to have things in boards and bags, because I can't just grab it and read it. Even when making this video, like, see, I got to the I have unbagged about 15 comics, and after that I was like, am I going to take them all out of their bags? And I have them doubled, so it's half the number, where I've got one on one side and one on the other. But I'm like, but I want to show the back covers, so every front cover and every back cover, that's 100 covers. And and I'm like, that's a lot of bags to open, and that's a lot of comics to pull out, and then I have to put them all back in there. And that sort of barrier to opening up and reading, and it becomes a thing that you have only for having. That's the only part I worry about. But the hardcovers are gorgeous books. The box set is a gorgeous box set, and the thing is that you can pick them up and you can read them. The hardcovers are a little on the hefty side, I would say. They're just a little over what I have as my ideal size, but the trades are fantastic. It all depends on where you are. I think collecting these in magazine format is a rare and unique pleasure because of that look and feel. You get the ads of other comics that are being published at that time. You get to see what Fantagraphics was doing, and some of these things are things that I also like. So I like seeing the first ads for Lloyd Lewin and other Daniel Clowes stuff. I love seeing other independent comics being advertised in them. I love reading the letters column and the letters pages, which is something I love doing in Marvel and DC comic, or Marvel comics in particular as well. I always love the letters column, and that kind of feeling for these singles, I think, makes them uh, uh, I don't know, makes them unique. Until you get to something like that box set, and you're like, well, okay, because not everyone can hunt down every single. You can get the box set, and you can have that feel. And I think the reason why I'm surprised that the box set hasn't sold out and gone out of print yet, to be honest, because so many of what Fantagraphics brings out, and especially their box sets, I think sell out fast, or they have limited quantities. Now, I don't know if they produced many of these thinking it would be a much bigger hit than it has been, and so therefore there are more, or it was such a hit that they've reprinted the box set. I'm not sure about that. I haven't looked that up, and neither would surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if it was such a hit that they've reprinted it, or they just have huge numbers because it's so popular. And it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't as big a hit as they thought it would be, and there's still copies left. However, if these out of print deluxe editions are anything to go by, once this goes out of print, it's going to become expensive. So I don't know if you're interested in speculation and all that stuff. And this is not financial advice, but I like the box set. I love the box set because of that luxurious treatment that it gives it. But I have to say, having all of these issues, I waited for more than 2 years. I think, before I picked up that box set, because I was just like, I love it. It's fantastic. But I already have that. And I think there are a lot of Love and Rockets fans out there who feel the same way. They're like, it looks like a great box set. $400 is a lot of money. $300 is a lot of money. And I already have all of the magazines. If you don't have the magazines, if you have read only some or one or two of these trade paperbacks, or if you picked up if you picked up one of these trades and liked what you had, this is a sort of collector's thing, except for that many collectors will say, oh, it's a humongous double dip to have a facsimile of everything. But I really do think that it's a fantastic way of getting into that reading it on a bi-monthly or every 4 months sort of, the thing that was being talked about, like an occasional visit to a friend, getting into that experience at the, at a in a way that you can't unless you seek out each and every issue of the 50 magazines. Gore Vidal says, Squire says we need a concrete reprint. Yes, absolutely, we need a concrete reprint. The only concrete I have now, except for a couple of floppies that I picked up at random, is those small Dark Horse editions, and I would love to see at least a full size, because I can see from the singles that it was used to be larger. So at least a regular size, if not an oversized hardcover concrete reprint, would be great. More of the original magazine issues popping around, a good thing due to the collections coming out. I see. So, Comic Crack, do you think what's happening is that because of, when you say the collections, you mean because of these? Because these are making them affordable, the magazines are becoming things that people don't want to hold on to anymore, or because they bought the box set, they can get rid of the singles, etc. I think that's a good opportunity for people who, at least people lucky enough to live in North America, the UK. I don't know if other parts of Europe have the same sort of availability of American comics in local comic book stores, and especially secondhand copies. I don't know how it is in Australia. Definitely isn't easy to come by in India. Although I have found India to have a little bit more access than many other places in the world. I'm often surprised when people tell me that this is not available, and it's an in-print available book. So in India, at least, um, at least to those who want to pay for it, you can get in-print books. It's the out of print and the second-hand and the ex-library, the eBay, the collectors selling off their collection. It's those things that people in North America and the UK seem to have that I'm very, very jealous of. But yes, it's a it's a crapshoot. Depends on where you live. A big concrete hardcover would be sweet. Yes, absolutely. Universal appeal of Love and Rocket is the only person missing here is Earl Grey. Yes, where is Earl Grey? Well, I'm sure he's busy, but I think he's on a trek. I think he's out on a walk, a big one. But yes. Oh, this is a good time for me to mention. Thank you so much for mentioning this, Gorvida. Uh, I have used a couple of sources, one, mainly from Fantagraphics themselves. So Fantagraphics has a good blog post that says how to get started reading Love and Rockets. And they have an updated version of it, I think, once this box set came out. And there's also a complete Love and Rockets bibliography. So even with me having these things, it's a little difficult to keep it all in mind. So those two sources are fantastic sources to use. And online, we have on YouTube, Earl Grey has done I think, a multi-part look at several of these issues, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to do it. I was just like, well, Earl Grey's already done it. What am I going to do about it? So the idea is, check all of these things out because it's a wonderful thing to explore. I want to just get to answering people's questions by getting people who love and rockets, because there are so many of them and they want to talk about love and rockets. I want to get them talking to the people who are curious about it, and even the people who have tried it, love and rockets, and not enjoyed it. I'd like them to talk a little bit about what they tried and what they didn't enjoy. And of course, as I say every time, nothing is for everyone. And Love and Rockets is a particularly difficult series because it's so diverse in its approaches and its subject matter and its style, because it's so idiosyncratic, but at the same time, that evolution that was being discussed right at the beginning of things that don't stay the same, and the whole point is not to stay the same. So even when you have the same characters, they age and they go through time and they go through different life experiences, and they learn from their mistakes, or they don't learn from their mistakes, or they spiral downwards. They pick themselves back up, and it sounds all very hokey, but the verisimilitude of it, the way that it feels, as we were saying, like real people and real situations, makes it a unique thing and worth checking out. And if there is this aspect to it, or that is intimidating, I think some of that aspect can be flipped to being alluring. Is look at all the different formats there are, look at all the different experiences you can have, and you can always say, if that didn't work for me, I'll try that, and if it didn't, if that's not my thing, then this other thing is. There's always going to be another avenue to explore. Once again, it's not to say that I firmly believe that no reading should be like homework or like medicine. Like, you have to, because it's the greatest thing, because people talk about it. You owe it to yourself to like it. There's no condescension towards people who don't like it. And I think that would be wrong to have that approach, because the whole idea of this is that these are comics that have no condescension to the reader, that they are completely trusting of the reader to. And as evidenced, I think, in the letters pages, as I was saying, some of these criticisms are so biting, and at the same time there are a lot of celebrities. That was one thing that I was thinking of, is that there are a lot of famous people writing in, or people who would later become famous. And I remember way back in the day when I had got my first copy of Seth's Palookaville, and I think it was number 3 or number 4 or something like that, and I was looking through the latest page, and there was a letter from a 17-year-old in high school, Adrian Tomine, a 17-year-old Adrian Tomine's mail to Seth and drawn on quarterly. It was a fantastic thing to read. Now, there are a lot of famous people who are already famous writing in these letters, but there are also some people who'd become more famous later on as well. So hunting through those and getting that experience is also a time capsule of how this was influencing readers at that time. But the criticisms of it, and when people are so, for example, the first 3 issues of these of volume 1, they start with these editorials, diatribes. I don't know what the right word is. Comics can be art, and here are some of the reasons why, by Gary Groth. So this is, I think, part 2, and I think part 1. Let me see if I'm remembering this correctly. Yes, effusive introductory words by Gary Groth. These are quite remarkable in the way that I haven't. I mean, and I know that there are magazines, and especially when they launch, they're like, oh, here's something wonderful, and these are lectures. These are people being told that the stuff that's out there is crap, and what we do in the Comics Journal is point out how all of that stuff is crap. And we always say that, why are people making crap comics? So here's good comics. Here you go. Here we're putting our money where our mouth is. There's a real pugilistic attitude in these write-ups and these editorials. So, and they're always asking, and in the initial ones, they ask people to send them letters and to let them have feedback and things like that. And somewhere, maybe it's in number 6, maybe it's not, but there's a letter from a reader who says, you guys are really bad at soliciting reader inputs, because all you're doing is lecturing us on how great you are and how great these comics are. And can we have less of Gary Groth and Kim Thompson, please? And can we have more of the Hernandez brothers? It's great, And I think there's a lot about where people will be like, man, I was with you, Jaime, until you go off into this thing, and now I'm completely irritated with that. Oh, but Gilbert, you're doing fantastic work. The other people are like, what is all this nonsense? I don't want to read this other stuff. That's the kind of stuff I want to read. So there's that push and pull, and there's the love it and the not. I am so irritated by it, even at that time, by people who are still picking this comic up. And I think that makes it absolutely marvelous to sort of step into and try to participate in distant proxy. No letters in the trades. Yes, there are no letters in the trades. The letters thing is it's like it's not for everyone, not, and I think it's one of those things like DVD extras. When DVDs first came out, I thought the greatest thing was the fact that they were all in widescreen, because I was sick and tired of pan and scan, and I used to try to find VHS things that had some people have no idea what I'm talking about now. But The other thing I really liked about DVDs were the extras and the director's commentary, or the documentary on the making of that was there. And it was like many years later that I realized that most people who bought DVDs never watched the extras. I just assumed that that's what you. Why would you buy a DVD if it wasn't for the extras? But yeah, so it's kind of like that. It's like I assume that anyone who ever buys a single or ever buys a magazine reads it cover to cover and reads the letters and reads the ads, because that's how it was. That's how comics were when I was young, and I used to get these American comics, Harvey comics, Marvel comics, DC comics, whatever. But I would read everything. The popsicle ads and the Cracker Jack ads are sort of seared into my. I had no idea what a Hostess Twinkie, was it a Hostess cupcake? Yeah, whatever it was. Like it was something golden, something and cream filling. I had no idea what this thing was, but I was so intrigued. So all of that stuff of a comic book made its purchase in my brain as much as the superheroes that I was reading about. So not having the letters, it may not mean anything for people. And if you, and particularly like say like, I think the first thing I ever read of Love and Rockets was Heartbreak Soup. And the first thing I ever read of Love and Rockets was in this format, and I loved it. It was fantastic. I had no idea that these were published serially or in magazine format. I had no idea that they came over. I just started on the first page of the story and went to the last page of the story. And then I discovered and went backwards and found all of these other things. Now, when reading this, you have no idea about letters, pages, and ads and publication schedule issues, and why there was an 8-month break and why they decided to end it and, issue 50, etc. But once you discover that, then you develop another. So it's not, absolutely, it's not necessary. It's not the thing that you have to have. And there is no such thing as that's the purest or that's the best or that's the only way to read it. It depends on what floats your boat. And obviously, I am a person who doesn't believe in choosing to say that, no, I'm just going to stick to this format. I'm just like, no, I have one of those and one of those and some of those, please. So you do have all kinds. Uh, Due to the hardcover collection coming out, Comic Crack is replying to my earlier question. People are getting rid of their single issues, aging out and getting rid of their collections. Yeah, it might be that as well. I was listening to a podcast the other day in which someone mentioned a garage sale and seeing all these comics out and talking to the man who was selling his comics in the United States. And he said, well, my kids and my grandkids aren't interested in this. They don't care about comics. So what else am I going to do? And I don't know. Somewhere that sounds sad, and somewhere it's like that's fine. I mean, people who like comics will get to buy them. I think rather than give them to your kids who are just going to throw them away or think about it as a big bother and a thing that they need to clean up. So aging out of collections is an interesting concept. I like it, actually. I mean, I think some things will age out of is like, oh, I used to love this, but I no longer love it, and I am no longer interested, and I'll give it to someone who will enjoy it and who will. And I think books somewhere. That's another reason to preserve books and keep them. I mean, apart from the hoarding aspect of things, you can, you kept them in good shape, and then you pass them on to someone else who will keep them in good shape, hopefully, and pass them on to someone else. I mean, this part of the joy of the physical item should be in that ability to transfer and sort of have it for a certain period of time, and now it's someone else's time to have it. One of the most interesting and also touching conversations I had was about around this thing. It was me. I was visiting my sister in the US. I was looking on eBay, of course, to see what I could take home with me, and I found someone selling a number of Chris Ware's Acme Novelty Library issues. Now, some of these I had. gotten that collected form, like say Jimmy Corrigan was in some of them, and later what would become Rusty Brown, etc. At that time, though, I wanted these issues, but they were extremely expensive and hard to find, and each one, would be like $20, $25, and there were 16 or 17 of them. And this gentleman was selling, I think, all or most of them that he had collected over time, and I made him an offer and he accepted, and I was, it was a good deal for me. And I asked him, "Why are you?" Oh no, he said, So I saw that he was selling other stuff, and he said, "Oh, I'm selling other stuff. If you want to take a look at it." I took a look at it, and then he said, "Of all the things I'm selling, this is the one that I feel, the worst about the the Chris Ware comics." And I said, "And why are you?" Doing that. He says, it's minimalism, cutting down costs, moving to a smaller place. He gave me all this. And then he said, yeah, and, my kids aren't interested. So I hope that somebody else enjoys them as much as I do, and that's more important. And I was like, oh my God, I am going to, and I wrote back to him. I was like, I'm going to enjoy them as much as you did. I want you to feel good that they're coming to me and you're making me very happy and you're making me very excited. And immediately after that, after I received that and I was like, oh, look at these, and I read them, I started thinking about when I would get to the point when I would give them away. I mean, I wasn't ready to give them away right then. It wasn't like I had a negative reaction to them, but something about that interaction made me feel like I want to. It made me look forward to the time when I will divest things from my collection. I'll have curated them and I'll package them together. I'll give a little write up and say why it's so special, etc. That's the thing. I think it's fine. I think it's good. I think it's healthy. So if people are getting rid of their comics because they've gotten the hardcover box set, it makes complete sense to me. I have sold trade paperbacks when I got the deluxe hardcovers, and I sold them to people that I was very happy that now they get to read Astro City, because I got the Astro City hardcover and I sold my Astro City trade paperbacks. Of course, a month later, I was like, why did I sell my trade paperbacks? They were such beautiful covers too. Like, I could have had both. But the point is that I still feel happy that someone else got to read Astro City in India because they bought trades from me. So I think, what does any of this have to do with Love and Rockets? Quite a bit, quite a bit. Sleepy Reader says that he loved Love and Rockets as much as everyone. I love bits and pieces, but haven't read it all. I think the box set is a great thing for you, Sleepy Reader, as a North American reader. And, by the way, if people, I just assumed everyone knows who Sleepy Reader and Gore Vidal and, the people in the chat are, but they are also fellow comics YouTubers. They have their channels. And Sleepy Reader, you do have a weekly pull list and a thing of, like you read in in a monthly sequence in a way that I don't. So I'd love to know what your approach is and how you think about box sets that do this kind of archival collection, as opposed to this, which is putting the story together and putting the serialized story together as a graphic novel. That's one thing, but to sort of take that facsimile approach to replicate the feeling of reading these magazines, I'd love to know what you think of it. Let's see what any other questions. Gary Groth and his critique style, Logan says, set a precedent and invited the fan base to rise to similar levels of acidic reviews. He liked to phrase it in defense of the medium. Yeah, I think things go through cycles. I think that acidic, acerbic, sort of caustic reviews, uh, they have their place, particularly if you're punching upward and punching against some sort of a monopolistic tradition, etc. I do think sometimes that it can go a little overboard, and it can go to this notion of the surety of someone's dismissal means that there is a right and a wrong and a best and a worst and a, like a correctness, like an absolute scientific correctness. Whereas I think it's the nature of the commentary and the nature of discussion that should stand for the respective value of works. So Love and Rockets is a great work because of the discussion around it, not because somebody boldly stated that if you don't like this, you're a heathen, and if you want to read Superman, then you are inferior in intellect because those comics are not as good as these comics. And that's just a fact. And that is what people in the know. There's something about that I find off-putting, although I understand where it comes from, but I don't think of it as, as being pointed on the comments, it can turn off as many people as it can attract. And what it can attract, this is an interesting thing. What it can attract couldn't be maybe not as good as you are. So maybe I'm very good at making sarcastic and biting and incisive statements. And maybe I've even developed a technique of reducing that into a very pithy comparison or a metaphor. And I can make that at the drop of a hat, apparently. But I'm a writer. Actually, I've worked on it over and over again. But the effortlessness and the humor and the way it makes you laugh makes people think that they can do it as well. So then it creates imitators. So yes, it could be rise to this level, but if the rise to this level is, look at how fast I dismissed somebody with a caustic adjective. So all I have to say is the unbearable Alex Toth. And I don't have to say anything else after that. I don't have to justify it. Now, someone who's a scholar might be able to justify it in some way, but the reduction of it to that thing is positioning it as in this is the truth, and this is how people who are really smart speak, by dismissing and belittling everything else and celebrating something with this humor. And then they create an ocean of imitators who think that's what clever criticism is, and that's what clever commentary is. And that reliance on humor and that reliance on that reductive pithiness, I think, can be very easily misused and very easily misinterpreted to then create a sort of ocean of bad criticism, irrespective of how smart the origin of it was, just because the imitators weren't as good, they weren't as diligent, and they didn't live up to that. But by reducing it to that, you made it possible for them to imitate easily. I don't know if that makes any sense. Comic Crack pulled up to the flea market. All right, take it easy and let us know what you got over there. Okay, Logan says, Sleepy Reader always checks out the extras. Logan says, I'm considering the aging out issue. My father and I collect comics together and have more than 6,000 single issues. Really hope my kids are into them one day. Yeah, it's great to have that kind of an inheritance. When I was about 10 or 11, I got into collecting stamps. Back in the day, things were sent by mail, which used. And so my father was very amused by that. He was like, oh, I used to collect stamps. And I was like, where's your stamp collection? He said, I gave it away. I said, why didn't you keep it for your kids? Because at that time I was in the throes of stamp collecting and hearing stories in the pre-internet days of how rare stamps and valuable stamps, etc., old stamps. And I was like, why didn't you save it for your kids? And he was like, how do I know whether my kids are going to like stamps? And why should I force them to, and everything that he said sounded very reasonable, but I was very irritated. I couldn't imagine someone giving away their collection. Today, of course, I'm a lot more sympathetic and empathetic to that point of view. Because I collect any series in one format, Masoom Rana Diwan says, I missed out on all B movies entries of Love and Rockets. B movies entries would be the the comic graphic novelization of the movies that certain characters are in. Yeah, they're sort of, I would say they're spin-offs because they're not, I don't know if this is accurate, but I think I heard somewhere Quentin Tarantino described his movies as one of two kinds. And you can tell me if this is not true. He said that I make movies with characters who are, certain characters. And then the other movies I make are the movies that these characters would watch. So Pulp Fiction is a movie that has a character, Vincent Vega, played by John Travolta. And Kill Bill is a movie that Vincent Vega would watch. So he's got like two different things going on. So it's sort of similar to that, I guess, is that these spin-offs and the things that have to do with Fritz in Gilbert's world, particularly as a character, there are things that they're not about Fritz. They're Fritz as an actress was in that movie. So I am okay with not considering them Love and Rocket stories, but again, it doesn't really matter. Julio's Day, for example, is not a Palomar story. It's not related to Palomar, or is it? But it has a distinct flavor that Gilbert Hernandez has in his Palomar set stories. And it has an appeal to me that makes me feel as if it's a Palomar story. But it is published in the pages of Love and Rockets. But it's not a Palomar story collection. But it was, so the classification part of it is more like us having fun and us playing around. It's not rule sets and it's not boundaries that are hard. They're kind of soft and nebulous. And I think it all depends on whether you like somebody, whether you like a creator, whether you like their style. So I have many books by people in all different shapes and sizes because that was the only edition I could get, and it doesn't matter. It only matters whether you like to read that story. I think these ones are the easiest to get, and they're nice. They're all the same size, and they look nice on the shelf together when you put them all next to each other. I think Fantagraphics is doing a great job with these, but they are shrunken down from magazine-sized ones, even from comic book-sized ones. They are. For example, I will say that in the second volume of the Gilbert Hernandez stuff, human diastrophism, the human diastrophism story has a certain arc, and then there are other stories here that the arc concludes after a certain point of time. Now there are also things that happen while this is going on. Okay, how am I going to do this clearly? All right, so in some of these stories, things happen in the town of Palomar. And then there are characters from Palomar who go out of Palomar and go to other places, like say in the United States, etc. So certain other stories follow them. And then you may have in these, in the magazine publishing, you may have some stories that were in Palomar, then some issues. And remember, these are bi-monthly or coming out 3-4 months. So 3 issues might be more than a year and a half. A year and a half, you'll have stories of people somewhere else, and then you'll come back later. Now, when you put them into these things, first of all, that year and a half passes by much faster. But the other thing is, you've taken the Palomar things and put them together, and anything that was taking place outside of Palomar, you've put them in over here. So this is a criticism that some people have, where they're like, no, I want to read it in that order because then it makes me feel like time has passed, because otherwise I'm getting a cut that, it's like, so this happened? When did this happen? Oh, it happened over here. And they're making a reference to it in the earlier volume, but in the second part of the earlier volume, which was published before. So no matter what, there are always going to be every form. I mean, especially with a series like this, there are always going to be questions of, could it have been done differently? But it's like, yes, if you want to read it differently, then read it in that format, read them in that sequence, because you're putting yourself in the shoes of that local comic book store buyer who read the stories in this way and then went away to the US with certain characters for some months and then came back to Palomar certain months later. But if you want to know what's going on in Palomar and what's going on with that serial killer who has appeared out of nowhere in this town, then that's the story you take. So how you're affected by time, how you're affected by characters can be quite different from person to person. In the order that they were published is an interesting. I as far as possible, I like to read things in order they were published, but I think that is a very grown up and adult part of me. As I was talking about earlier, there are certain things where when I was young, I read things out of order and it didn't matter. Like I think about this, like Tintin, for example, a very formative reading experience for me when I was young, and a big part of this channel even today. When I read Tintin, the Tintin adventures, I read them all out of order, and I just created my own connections. And I realized, and we talked with, amongst friends, and they're like, oh no, calculus doesn't appear until blah 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 and all of that stuff. It's like, if I was to start reading Tintin today, I would want to read it in sequence, and I would want to go in that order. And there's almost no way that I wouldn't want to do it in that way, which, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but there is a certain loss of freedom, of an innocence, of a sort of activity in our quest for total, complete comprehension, clarity. But I do agree that when thinking about how people evolve and how stories, especially long-running stories about the same characters, how they evolve, I think it's a unique part of that. At at other times, there are lots of stories that I think don't start off as good as they become later, and I would prefer to read all the good stuff first, and then I'm more tolerant of the stuff that's not as good, because it's how the great stuff was born. So reading earlier Usagi Yojimbo, for me, for example, was fine, because I started with later Usagi Yojimbo, and they were so good that when I read in earlier ones and they weren't the same way, I was more forgiving of it. And if I'd started with that, I may not have continued, or I may have thought that, okay, this is all right, it's fine, it's not. But because I had a view of what it becomes, because I'd seen what it became, and it's also true for a lot of people that Fantagraphics publishes. For example, Jason, they they publish Jason books in a certain order, and then they give you earlier Jason works later. And now I saw recently that Pocketful of Rain, which is a collection of his earliest stuff, is getting a new reprint, is getting a new edition, which is fantastic, because Pocketful of Rain's been out of print for a long time. But if I'd started reading Jason with Pocketful of Rain, I don't know if I would have continued. If I'd started reading Adrian Tomina with the zine that he was doing when he was 16 or 17, those issues of Optic Nerve, I don't know if I would have continued. It's because I started with Shortcomings or I Killed Adolf Hitler, things that were very polished or had gotten to a certain level of maturity, that I had that interest in seeing what was this person. If there's earlier stuff, how was it? So I do think that there is something to be said for reading out of order, and I do think there is something to be said for get to the best stuff. Whatever someone tells you is the best stuff, read that. If that needs to be what got you in. Which episode of Firefly would you ask people to watch if they could only watch one? I doubt it would be the first one. There's nothing wrong with the first one, but everyone has a different episode that they'd give as the calling card to say that, okay, now that you've seen this, you're not going to have much spoiled for you. You're going to be hooked, and you're going to go back to the beginning to read that. So Soumya Das wants to know what stamps are. Yes, postales. Uh, in the 80s, Gore Vidal read Marvel, DC, and the Independents. Reading the Independents makes you a heretic in superhero readers? I always thought superhero readers were the ones condescended to by the independent readers. Uh, oh, that's just my assumption. Yes, I think there's a comment made over here, loving Watchmen, poor faith criticism of all superhero comics. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Watchmen is a problem on so many different levels, because it's a great comic. I mean, I maintain it's a great comic and it's a masterpiece. And I've been in many conversations in which people say that Watchmen is overrated or is not as great as people make it out to be. And I'm like, I don't quite understand, but maybe I'll do a hot takes type of video. Actually, should be more, I don't have any hot takes. The kind of video I should make should be cool reacts to hot takes. Like, people should give their hot takes, and I should be like, actually. But instead of being actually in a thing, I'll be just I'll be propagating the cliche. I'll be supporting the generic popular way of looking at things. Um, yes, I think dismissing what other people love is cruel and short-sighted. Well said. I don't even think it's good criticism. I think you can say something doesn't work for you, and you can say, and I think this is where So why am I having long rambling live streams? Is because I think sometimes things take nuance and sometimes things take like hemming and hawing, and any declaration you make could very easily be the opposite declaration. So I do think that there's, that everything has to be boiled down and reduced, and that somehow uh, it is definitely an act of crafting to to distill something, and absolutely boiling things down in certain ways is very, very important, because you can't just have an endless barrage of words, no matter how much I try. But I don't think thinking that the only way to talk about things is in snappy 127 character responses and stock phrases, and a lot of what I don't like about internet commentary, not real commentary and analysis, but that sort of hit and run snarky comment. A lot of this can be traced to that kind of criticism also, I feel. um, but on the other hand, loving something doesn't shield from, absolutely. And I think that loving something like Love and Rockets, uh, it's not about shielding it from criticism at all. I think that loving something in spite of things, or recognizing flaws or issues, or again, depending on what we mean by all of these things, but listening to what people have to say. Most of the time, if someone takes something that I love and they say, well, that was sentimental, I'll usually agree with them. I mean, if I'm talking to someone sane, my whole point is I like the way that it didn't allow that sentimentality to interfere with the storytelling that it wanted to do, or I like the way it harnessed that sentimentality in a way that I haven't seen done before, or I like, it's going to incorporate that, or I'm going to say the thing you didn't like is a thing I liked, or the thing you hated is a thing that didn't bother me too much. I'm not going to say it didn't exist at all, unless I'm just going to say I don't agree with that interpretation or something. So I absolutely think that shielding something from criticism is more of a, I think that's where you get to fanboy. It's a much more devout and a much more blind and a much more no faults sort of approach, which is not the same thing as criticism, in my opinion. Saying something is awesome and flawless, or something is shit. That's not the way I would like to approach these things. But endless deluge of words, yes, that would be something. I completely lost where we were, but I think that we've gotten through a bunch of different things. We've talked about a number of different things, but I'm going to make this nice and solid in a particular wrap up. I don't know if it's a wrap up per se, but from 1982 to 1996, we've got 50 issues that you can read in magazine format, and you can get these in sequence. You can buy them in lots if you can. If you've got this availability, you've got 50 issues of that. All 50 issues are part of this box set, and reproduced letters and covers and all in this. And you've got that extra volume with critical writings, and they're contemporary works. So that's the thing I didn't talk about the last volume. This is not something that is written today. All of the stuff that is inside this volume is things that were created. So even if you have a review, a positive review of the magazine that was published in a newspaper or in a journal, it's the review from that time. So it isn't people writing today about Love and Rockets. It's that 1981 to 1996 speaks for the things in here. So the 50 issues and or the box set would be the way to go if you've got a hankering for every single thing, all the stories, all the short pieces, all the one pages serialized in the way they were, with the letters pages, with the covers, with the ads put together. That's the box set. That's the way to do it. This is sort of unfaultable as a thing right now, primarily because it's still in print, still available, and available at what I consider, for the package and for the thing itself, to be a bargain price. So that's definitely my number one recommendation. But not everybody wants to get the whole thing in that format or spend $250, in which case these things, these trades over here are a once again, I'm going these trades starting with, so I'll quickly give you the volumes. So the first volume is Music for Mechanics. As I said, this has got stories from, this is issues 1 and 2 almost in their entirety. I would say in their entirety. So issues 1 and 2, or everything collected in Music for Mechanics. Then you've got Cello's Burden, which collects things from issues 3 and 4. And where is it now? It's probably in my Tintin box set video. There's one comment that I've never forgotten. It's just, bro, don't drag the box on the table. And I was just like, man, I really hurt someone over there, because I take care of my books, but I probably slid the box set back and forth on the table, and that's what a box is for, is the way I look at it. But I must have really damaged. So now I'm very careful about how I offend people on the way I treat my books. So Cello's Burden is volume 2 of the trade paperbacks, contains issues 3 and 4. But I would say volume 1 and volume 2 are the only two that collect the issues in their entirety in sequence, the way. And I think from volume 3 onwards, which is Las Mujeres Perdidas, this is where the stories start becoming more grouped together by character and by arc, which is also the case over here, but they are much more randomized, especially in that first volume, especially in this first volume. From here onwards, you've got the Paloma stories coming in. The only weird thing is that the very first Palomar story, it's like a small little short story called A Little Story, that's what it's called, is in the first volume of the trade paperbacks. Now, the interesting thing is, although the magazine started being published in 1982, the first trade paperback wasn't published until 85. So there were 3 years of magazines being published before this trade came out. And I think 1984, 1985 is maybe where trade paperbacks really became a thing. Maybe they weren't a thing before that. There were certain collections, I guess, but I'm guessing it's that same Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns, and those are the comics that I think created that surge. If not, it wasn't the birth of the trade paperback, but I think that's where the surge took place. But this, A Little Story, is a story from 1985. So this is a short story that was written 3 years after the beginning of the Heartbreak Soup stories. But when starting the trade paperbacks, for some reason, that short story is the first glimpse of Palomar you see before you get into the 1980. Wow, that's not the one. Before you get into the 1982, 1983 original first story. So it's an interesting choice. And I think, again, the narrative decision to put that story into the trade as the first story instead of the 1980s, it's just one of those weird things that the editors have had to do. And I think maybe Gilbert Hernandez had something to do with it. But Music for Mechanics would otherwise be a very removed thing as far as Gilbert Hernandez's Paloma stories are concerned. But the inclusion of that 1985 story over here means that you actually, if you're reading it only in the trades, you start with a flashback in the future being your first story instead of what was chronologically the first story. And by chronologically, of course, I only mean the chronological nature of the publication, because the stories always have flashbacks and are flashing forward and backward in time constantly. Once we've gotten that, you've got volume 3. Here's the thing I forgot to say, and I think most of you already know this, but or maybe many of you know this, but some of you, Love and Rockets, the logo, the original logo that was being used, was designed by Mr. Todd Klein. So I did not know that until I think I got the trade paperbacks in which it was mentioned, or maybe I overlooked the credit and then I saw that it's Todd Klein, letterer extraordinaire of the Sandman and Swamp Thing and Fables and everything. I mean, everything other than Usagi Yojimbo and Gru is Todd Klein. But it's a cool, iconic logo from a famous designer. And the reason I remember it is that these trade paperbacks are reprints. So they have the name of the storyline. The original trade paperbacks actually had that Love and Rockets over there. And the name of the storyline may have been a very small subtitle, whereas these have now changed to Los Bros Hernandez on top and the name, and then right down here a Love and Rockets collection. So instead of it saying Love and Rockets, that's something that the trades themselves did to make these stand as graphic novels, and eventually they would stop having Los Bros Hernandez because they stopped being a mixture of